everybody, Nike here. So Warrior didn't get many PvE changes in the spring patch, but my old Warrior guide was over 6 months old and well out of date from the current meta. So I felt it was definitely time to update it. A Warrior's role in PvE raids, dungeons, or fractals is to be an offensive buff generator for the party with banners, might, and empowered allies. Condition Damage Warrior was once a viable alternative as a pure damage dealer, but after the Scorched Earth nerf, its best role is as a slightly higher DPS alternative to the power build for situations where you don't need quite as much of a might contribution from the warrior or empowered allies, but you still want banner buffs, and it's especially useful in situations where it's difficult for a warrior to land a complete 100 blades rotation because the boss moves so much. So based on that, there are 2 warrior builds I'm going to recommend and go over today. The first is the Phalanx Strength Warrior. This has been the meta build for ages and ages and will continue to be the primary build in almost all circumstances, and most of you out there should be very familiar with this build. The second build is the Condi Berserker build, which is designed to do a bit more DPS than the meta power build in some circumstances. The trade-off is that you will be able to stack a bit less might than the PS build, so it really works well in groups where you can get some might from the Revenant and the Mesmer's Signet of Inspiration and an Elementalist Heatsink. However, the build, as I said before, does lack empowered allies, so it's only particularly useful in compositions that are heavy on condition damage dealers. So if your raid group has 2 NGs and a Necro, this might not be the worst idea, and it's something to definitely consider. So let's get into the builds. Alright, so let's talk gear for the Phalanx Warrior. For the Phalanx Warrior, I recommend full Berserker stats with enough pieces of Assassin's gear mixed in to achieve an additional 3% crit chance. This 3% crit chance can be achieved by running Assassin's Earrings or Assassin's Weapons, or if you convert your head, chest, and leggings to Assassin's Armor. Your rune set should be Superior Rune of the Scholar. What we found in our raid group was that Superior Rune of the Scholar on the Warrior, along with the other buffs you get from your party, is more than enough to keep 25 might on your group at all times. In dungeons and fractals, you may, especially in pugs, still want to go with strength runes. However, I think you can use food as an alternative to that to achieve better results than having to use strength runes. Strength runes are a pretty decent DPS boost, somewhere around 10%. So I highly recommend using Scholar if you're not already geared there. For weapons, I recommend Greatsword as your main weapon with Sigil of Air and Sigil of Force. On swap, for raids primarily, but also for fractals and dungeons where you do have to break bars to get your party's DPS up, I recommend Mace and Shield on swap. In dungeons or fractals where the shield block isn't incredibly useful, you can go Mace, but in raids, I definitely think that there is value in having an on-demand block. As you can see from the sigils, I'm recommending Force on the Mace and Strength on the Shield. It doesn't particularly matter where you put the Strength sigil, but it is nice, especially in raids, when you do have to swap to this set for CC or for the block, that you're still able to generate some might for your party with the Strength sigil. So that is it for gear. Pretty straightforward, and not much has changed, except definitely recommend Rune of the Scholar at this time. So next, we will talk about traits. Alright, our traits, we're going to take Strength, Tactics, and Berserker. In Strength, we're going to take Restorative Strength, Forceful Greatsword, Berserker's Power. In Tactics, we're going to take Empowered, Empowered Allies, Phalanx Strength. And in Berserker, we're going to take Smash Brawler, Blood Reaction, and Bloody Roar. So Restorative Strength is going to give our party 5 stacks of might every time we activate our heal. Not really that big of a deal, but every little bit helps. Forceful Greatsword is going to be a huge DPS increase for us, as well as our primary method of generating might. And Berserker's Power is a 20% DPS boost that helps us do pretty good damage. In Tactics, Empowered is a 1% DPS boost for every boon on us, which is very, very good. Empowered Allies is about a 3 to 5% buff to everyone in our party that's using a power build. Very good as well. And Failing Strength allows the might stacks that we give to ourselves to be spread to our party, which means we can act as the primary might generator for our group. Smash Brawler is going to lower our DPS downtime by increasing the uptime of our Berserk mode. We'll be in Berserk mode more often, and we will be doing more DPS as a result. Blood Reaction gives about an additional 20% additional crit damage while in Berserk, which is a huge DPS increase. And Bloody Roar is another 10% DPS modifier, which really goes a long way towards making Berserker a very good elite spec for DPS. So that is it for the traits. Most of those have not changed a bit, and we'll talk about consumables and skills next. Alright, what consumables do I recommend? Generally speaking, I recommend truffle steak as our primary go-to food. When you're in a raid squad that has a ranger, so you know you're going to have spotter, the build I recommend will put you at about 100% crit chance exactly with spotter. Therefore, you don't want food that has precision in it, so the next best choices are sweet and spicy butternut squash soup for all-out DPS when money is no option, and golden fried dumplings for additional might stacking capabilities. One last food to consider is dragon breath buns, which are especially good in Wing 2, as well as Sabbatha in Wing 1, where there are enough adds to kill that you will always, 100% of the time, have the additional plus 200 power. If you're in a fight like Slothosaur, Sabbatha, or the Bandit Trio, where you will have Dragon's Breath buns up 100% of the time, this is the best in slot food. So it is definitely worth having in your bag for those situations. As far as our utility consumable, I recommend Bountiful Sharpening Stones. They are simply the best thing that a warrior can get. The 10% boon duration is always useful, especially since we have Scholar Runes, and 100 power is best in the business. There's really nothing that beats this, to be honest, and there's no real good substitute. You can use the regular Sharpening Stones, but they're only going to give you about 90-something power. They just don't compare. If you're on a budget, go with the regular Sharpening Stones, but I think, especially if you're a raider, to invest in Bountiful Sharpening Stones. So yeah, that's it for consumables and slot skills now. So our default healing skill is going to be Blood Reckoning. I did create another guide on my channel for which healing skill to use for which raid boss, if you guys are really interested in min-maxing your heal skill for each battle. However, for the most part, you can use Blood Reckoning in each fight and have absolutely no issues. For our regular utility skills, we're going to take Signet of Fury, Banner of Discipline, and Banner of Strength. If you happen to be in a group that has multiple warriors, feel free to divvy up the two banners between you, and with your free slot, you should take Signet of Might for an additional DPS boost of around 5 to 7%. That is pretty key. Our elite skill is going to be Headbutt. Headbutt has a lot of things going for it. First, it's a super powerful CC. It's a stun breaker. It does a lot of damage, and it fills up our adrenaline, meaning we can start every fight in Berserk mode without having to slowly build up our adrenaline on the way in. It basically does it all. When you know you need to save it for CC, you can save it for CC. When you know you're in a dangerous situation and you're going to need a stun break, you can save it for stun break. And when you need to just do a good DPS rotation, you can just use Headbutt for that. It really is a Swiss Army knife and ultra powerful. So Headbutt, super awesome. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to play a super boring 1-minute DPS rotation thereabout, showing you the stock way to play. The goal, of course, is always to maximize your stick and move 10% by dodging when necessary, and making sure that you use your money greatsword skills 2 through 5 as much as possible. So alright guys, stay tuned for that, and when we come back, we will talk about the Condi build. Alright, Condi Berserker. For this build, I recommend Vipers, Weapons, and Armor. The trinkets are going to be a bit of a mix match of Vipers and Sinisters in order to have our goal of reaching exactly 100% condition duration on burns and bleeds. So the way I think is easiest to do is to have a Viper's Amulet, 2 rings that are Viper rings, 1 Viper earring, 1 Sinister earring, and then your back piece can be either Rampagers, Rabid, whatever, it doesn't matter, but you don't need it to be Viper, put it that way. With our traits, that gets us to 70% burning and bleeding, and with food, we'll be at exactly 100%. So this is a very min-maxed setup. So, in regards to our runes, I recommend with this build Superior Rune of the Aristocracy. This build gives condition damage and might duration. Yes, Berserker would be a higher DPS option, as would Nightmare and Black Diamond. However, those builds were not concerned with might stacking capabilities. This build can no really longer stand on its own as a pure DPS build. It has to provide might to the party to be useful. In order to get your group to 25 might and keep them there, you're almost certainly going to need Aristocracy runes. However, Berserker runes are very expensive, I understand that. If you already have your set geared out with Berserker runes, what I would do is do a couple test raids where you play the build as your group's might stacker with Berserker runes. If you guys can still get to 25% might with everything else going on and all your other teammates doing what they do, great, keep the Berserker runes. If you cannot, I would recommend switching to Aristocracy as I have done. For the weapons, I recommend Sword, Torch, and Longbow. Your sigils on each set are going to be identical. Sigil of Strength and Sigil of Earth. Some people do recommend Sigil of Geo on your Sword Torch, but I believe Earth in this build, because it doesn't have Discipline, is the better option to Geo. Since we achieve 100% condition duration thanks to the Viper's trinkets, we do not need sigils like Smoldering, Malice, or Agony. And before anyone in the comments asks, and I know you will, Sigil of Earth is 100% superior to Bursting. I don't mean statistically 100% superior. I mean, without a doubt, Sigil of Earth is better than Sigil of Bursting. Sigil of Earth will increase your DPS by significantly more than Sigil of Bursting will. So that is that. Hopefully that settles any disputes before they start. Alright guys, so let's get into traits. Alright, traits guys. We're going to take Arms, Tactics, and Berserker. In Arms, we want Berserker's Fury, Deep Strike, and Furious. These traits all kind of combo with each other in order to buff our Condi damage and allow us to use our burst skills on cooldown thanks to the additional adrenaline from Furious. It's just Condi damage heaven, and we like that. We'll save Tactics for last because there's a lot to say. In Berserker, we want Smash Brawler, Heat of the Soul, and King of Fires. For all the reasons I mentioned in the power build, Smash Brawler is good. Heat of the Soul is obviously a ridiculously good skill when we swap to Sword Torch. And our King of Fires is going to give us big burning duration and every now and then some incidental burns when we explode our Fire Shield. In Tactics, I'm going to recommend Empowered, Burning Arrows, and Phalanx Strength. There's going to be a lot of people that say, oh no, you should take Empowered Allies anyway, it's better than Burning Arrows. This is a very big debate, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to settle it here, but here's my rationale. If you're in a group with all Condi damage players in your squad, you don't need Empowered Allies. It doesn't help them very much. Burning Arrows is just pure upside. If you're in a group with tons of power guys, let's say you're in a raid group that has 3 Ellies and a Thief and a Rev. Well, okay. In that case, Empowered Allies is really good. But to go from Burning Arrows to Empowered Allies, you have to give up a lot of personal DPS. If you're giving up that much personal DPS, you should probably be running the Power Warrior PS build. Because when you switch from Burning Arrows to EA, your damage goes down by enough that the PS Warrior build with Greatsword does better damage than this. So in order for this to be worth using in the first place, you have to be running burning arrows. So basically it comes down to, if your team will benefit a ton from empowered allies, play the power build. If your team won't benefit a great deal from empowered allies, you can run Condi and make a good deal with the burning arrows. So that is where I think the debate stands at this point. I don't think that will entirely settle it. If you guys have any questions or comments or input on my rationale, feel free to leave them in the comments below. But we can move on and talk about slot skills right now. So, our baseline healing skill for this build is going to be Healing Signet. We are going to take for Great Justice because it contributes to the might stacking capability of the build. And then both banners as is standard for the warrior. And our elite headbutt will be for CC, for stun break, and for filling our adrenaline in emergencies where we need adrenaline. Should you have a second warrior in your group for whatever reason, feel free to swap out a banner. The next best skill to take is Shattering Blow, which is going to inflict a lot of bleeds on a pretty short cooldown. It's going to count as a rage skill for blowing up our fire aura, and any fire aura you get from a Revenant. So it's a really high DPS option if, for whatever reason, you don't need to bring both banners. Why Healing Sig is our default? Well, because Blood Reckoning doesn't really work with a Condi build. It only converts power damage to healing, so the heal is terrible. The other option is Defiant Stance, which, if you can play smart and use it to your advantage when you know a boss is about to do a big hit, you can heal yourself to full with it. But generally speaking, I recommend for most players on a Condi build that you'll get more out of Healing Signet. So what I'm going to do next is talk a bit about consumables. Alright guys, consumables is really easy for the Condi Berserker because there's only two real options. Koi Cake or Rare Veggie Pizzas, if you have a lot of money, are the only real food option because we need that 20% Condi duration, as well as Toxic Focusing Crystals for the additional 10% Condi duration. Simply put, these are really kind of not debatable. I mean, there are budget versions of Koi Cakes, like Supreme Veggie Pizza, that I think is like 14% Condi duration, maybe 16%, I'm not sure. I guess if you're on a budget, you can use that, but it will very negatively impact your DPS. Toxic Focusing Crystals, there's really no substitute. If you were a cheapskate and didn't want to use these and wanted to use regular just Focusing Crystals, you could, but it's going to mean that you have to replace your Earth Sigil with a Malice Sigil. Unfortunately, doing that is going to really impact your DPS. There's really just no better way to do it. If you're committed to running this build and you don't want to run the Phalanx Greatsword build and this is your build, invest in Toxic Focusing Crystals because it's going to be, simply put, the best way to do it. So what I'm going to do next is show a quick rotation of the Condi Berserker. One thing to point out about how the Condi Berserker plays is you're going to activate Berserk mode and you're going to Scorched Earth on cooldown using Fan of Fire and Pin Down within. If you have Burning Arrows, you can just auto attack. If you don't have Burning Arrows, you should use Smoldering Arrows because it's a 100% projectile finisher and will always inflict a burn. But if you have Burning Arrows, just autoing is going to be better DPS than using Smoldering Arrow. Additionally, at the second Berserk mode ends, you're going to want to swap to Sword Torch and Flurry for a big bleed burst, followed by your Torch skills. As soon as Berserk comes off cooldown and your weapon swap comes off cooldown, back to Longbow and repeat. That is going to be the highest DPS option for you as far as rotation goes. Even with Burning Arrows, you don't want to camp Longbow and do your Longbow skills while your Scorched Earth and Berserk is on cooldown. It is about 1,000 DPS a second, so that works out to be like an 8% DPS increase to swap to Sword and do the Torch skills and the Flurry and some Sword autos while your Berserk mode is in downtime. If you have any questions about that, I ran tests with a whole bunch of different builds and rotations, and I can give you guys more in-depth answers in the comments below. But for now, just take a peek at this, and we'll wrap it up after. Alright everybody, that is it. I hope you enjoyed my updated warrior build guide for raids, dungeons, and fractals. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments, and I will do my absolute best to answer them. Good luck out there. I'm glad dungeons are back. I'm glad fractals are fixed, and I'm glad that raids are freaking awesome in Guild Wars 2, and we can all enjoy the game again. Very good stuff, and I will see you next time.